Hi, thanks for being here with us at Rose Quartz Mediumship Podcast, where we have Kim Stills here with us today to chat a little bit about metaphysics and healing. So thank you for being here with us today, Kim.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you tell the listeners who don't know you a little bit about who you are, how you came to metaphysics and healing, and how we cross paths?
Yeah. So I first met Erin 2 years ago, coming out of a really tumultuous breakup and looking for some solid ground in my life. It felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. It felt like I didn't know which way was up, and I was magically and wonderfully thrown into Erin's world. I attended a workshop. We were working on divine feminine and shadow work, and whew, that like blew my world wide open, and just in the very best way opened me up to the community that Erin's created, and just a deeper understanding of myself. So
I love that. I remember that workshop vividly and getting to meet you and thinking, she's somebody who's going to stay in my reality.
yes, please.
And isn't it amazing how those kind of tumultuous breakups, when we're in the middle of them, they are horrible, right? Mm-hmm. They like rock your world in all the worst ways.
Yeah.
And what you don't realize in the moment is that they're about to rock your world in all of the best ways. And every time I've gone through a big event of turmoil in my life, it always results in healing and expansion. And when you're in the moment of the turmoil, it's hard to zoom out and see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fucking hard.
Exactly.
It feels like you've been swept away, but you have to sweep away that old energy in order for something new to come in, and that's ultimately where I landed with things, but it was a journey.
Yeah.
And every day is a journey, but
yes. Yes, yeah.
The work doesn't stop.
The work doesn't. I remember when I was originally doing healing work thinking, I'm going to get somewhere, right? Like I'm going to get to this point where it's going to stop. And I remember the place in my development where I realized it would never stop. Mm-hmm. And then I remember the point in my development where I realized I never wanted it to stop.
Yeah.
You know, that I wanted continuous growth and healing.
Yeah, it's like you appreciate the beauty of the path and where you are on that path, and you're just so grateful for even those tumultuous things that tore your world apart, because it's just so amazing to see the path, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It is amazingly beautiful. Yeah. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what your work looked like coming out of that tumultuous breakup, coming out of that level of chaos and drama and upheaval in your life, and where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, so ultimately I think what that breakup did for me was show me the parts of myself that needed healing.
Yes.
And
yes.
It hurt to see them because there was so much pain there, and there was so much fear. But to have the opportunity to see them with Erin's guidance and with the support of community, and to have compassion for the parts of myself that were really wounded and disconnected, it was transformational. And I relate to myself in a totally different way now.
Isn't that amazing? And yet, if you had rewound and asked the version of you right before you went through that breakup and that turmoil, if you were connected to yourself, what would have you said?
Oh, I would have said, yeah. Sure,
right?
I was so oblivious. I was just like in autopilot mode. Mm-hmm. And I think what events like that do for you is they shake you out of your autopilot.
Yeah.
And you have to like figure shit out without those, kind of mechanical default settings that you're operating in.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it really shook all the shit up for me. And, it uncovered a lot of childhood trauma, of course, because, the reason that we connect with partners sometimes as adults is because they reflect where we're at in life. And this partner who I had attracted reflected a version of me that was needing someone to give them worth and needing someone to validate them. And so I really had to find that worth within myself and water my own garden, so to speak, and not feel the need for someone to do that for me. And it's a process. I'm still working on that. It's not like that healed over and magically moved on, but it was a tremendous amount of growth in that area, accelerated.
Yeah. It was so beautiful to get to observe you in your process and in your journey and watch you change, from one meeting to another. And the way that you were talking about yourself, the way that you were engaging with the world, the way that you saw the world, and getting to watch all that change so drastically was just pure magic for me.
Yeah, I mean, we always say when you do the work inside, the changes outside start to happen. Yeah. But it's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to experience it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, see the abundance start to appear and see people show up in your life who reflect that version of you that has self-worth and that is becoming more healed and more whole.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't it amazing the difference between being told something and experiencing it yourself? When you really experience an energetic shift internally, when you challenge the stories that you're telling yourself, when you challenge your patterns, when you shift that energy and you get to see in real time the change about who you're attracting into your reality, what experiences you're attracting into your reality. It is absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah. And just seeing where those mistaken or subversive kind of thought patterns were holding you back, and how it's like a floodgate. When you let those go, all of this newness comes in to meet you, and it just rushes in.
Yeah. And once you have a couple of those experiences, it's, for me anyways, I guess I'll just speak for myself, it's really motivating. Once you experience it for yourself and have the lived experience of shifting your internal story, breaking your patterns, and then seeing the change in your reality, for me, it's so motivating.
Yeah.
Then it makes it so much easier to do that deep, difficult work.
Right. And I think also it helps you when there are those times when things are shaken up, you trust them a little bit more.
Yes.
Yes. You've had that there's light on the other side. That there's a reason that the storm is coming in and knocking all your trees down, because there's new ones that are going to grow, and they're going to be even more amazing and more beautiful.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful point. At this point in my life, whenever chaos or drama comes into my reality, I recognize there's a lesson that I need to learn. And in order to learn that lesson, I have to have this experience. And so it really takes me out of that kind of victim spot where I'm feeling bad for myself and I'm saying, why me? Or, whatever the situation is, I recognize, even if I don't understand it in the moment, and frequently I don't, I trust that the universe has got me, and then I'll get on the other side of it.
Yeah. Sometimes I have to hold on really tight.
Right.
But I do trust now.
Yeah. 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 I like that. Hold on really tight. It's true. There's times where we go through stuff and we're like, okay, I don't get it. And where's my safety belt?
Right. I'm holding on to something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love, too, the statement that you made earlier about the inner child trauma work, because my experience is that so many people don't understand that the trauma that they experienced as a child, regardless of how quote unquote large or small it is, right? So it can be just a moment in time, a blip, a 3-second interaction with somebody that you hold on to that defines the way that you tell a story and the patterns, the ways that you show up in the world. But that inner child trauma work is life changing. And I can't tell you how many people have come to me saying, I want to change my reality. I want my life to feel different. And then we go back and start looking at inner child trauma, right? And looking at where are the stories that hold you in your current reality. And they kind of look around like, why do we have to do this work? I don't want to do this. I already looked at it. I'm over it.
Well, it's not fun. Let's get that straight. Like, it's not.
No, it's not fun.
But it's worth it.
It's worth it. Yeah, it's not fun. Looking at those things. And oftentimes we tell ourselves a story that we've already looked at it.
Yeah, well, I think in one way or the other we kind of have, but we haven't felt it, or we haven't really dug deep and sat with it and given it the respect and the attention that it deserves.
Yeah. And being able to recognize how the story that you created as a 2-year-old, as a 6-year-old, as an 8-year-old, as a 4-year-old, whatever the situation is, that story is still running in the background in your mind, right? Like if you had some experience as a child where you were abandoned, that story is still running in your background. And you can think that it's about your here and now. And it is. But almost always it's connected back to childhood, where the original root of the wound started.
Yeah.
And so it takes looking at the story now, but also looking at the story when you were a child. How did you create that story of abandonment? What is the story you told yourself when your dad or your mom or your grandma or your brother or your sister, whoever walked out of your life?
Right.
Was it that you were not enough? Somehow you did something wrong. And then you start carrying that story. And people will say, but I have proof, right? Like, I have all these lived experiences that I am not enough. And trying to help people understand that space of law of attraction, and that if you're putting out to the universe that you are not enough, you are going to have mirrored back at you experiences, people, things of scarcity, of abandonment. You're going to reinforce that story inside of yourself.
Right. Even if you don't know it's running, just 100%. Energetically.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the community that you've developed and the ability that we have to see each other do the work makes it a little bit more easy. Like we said, inner child work is hard as fuck, right?
Yes.
But when you know that you're not the only one who told yourself a story when you were 4 years old, or who somebody said, like, who are you to think that or do that or say that, it's kind of like the weight comes off your shoulders and you're more willing to step into it, because you know it's ultimately not something that's wrong with you. You know that it's a way that you interpreted an event that you carried with you, and it becomes easier. Not easy, but easier. And you feel the support of others in the work.
Yeah. I'm a huge believer that community and belonging is the only path to healing. It's the only path. If you don't have community and you don't have a sense of belonging, my truth is that it's impossible to heal. That sense of belonging, whether it's inside yourself, in a small community, or in a larger community, that is so important. It's so important.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny that you bring that up. So the organization that I work for, we are a sales organization, but we're a nonprofit organization. And we were founded on the principle that students learn best when they have a sense of belonging to their school community.
Right.
And we've done all of this research around it. And, part of my healing and my finding a sense of belonging was my ability to really see that on a higher level. And when I was able to see that on a higher level, I was able to feel better about, not that I didn't feel good about the work, but because I had experienced it for myself, I felt more free to like put myself out there and represent it and know that I was representing something with real value.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
So
what was it like for you to find a sense of belonging inside the Rose Quartz mediumship community?
it was huge. It was life-changing. I have always identified myself as a little bit of a loner. I think in part because I see the world a little bit differently, and I have, or differently from the people who I was immersed in growing up, and to find others who shared some of those beliefs and who just saw me in all of my lightest ways was just so reinforcing, and so I don't even know what the word is for it.
Yeah.
But it's like you found a family almost.
Yeah.
And you get to reestablish that sense of belonging that maybe you didn't have. So kind of full circle with the inner child work. It helps you to do that work because you finally have that feeling that maybe you were lacking and you thought you didn't feel because there was something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just, you weren't on the same vibration as the people who you were trying to find that belonging with.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you first started integrating into the community, did you find it hard to allow yourself to belong? Or what was that process like for you?
Yeah, it was hard. Because on some level, those stories were still running. I was working on them, but
exactly.
They would pop up from time to time, and I would pull myself back and not want my voice to be heard or not want people to see me. But like with anything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you start to feel, and it just is liberating.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And I love that you're so open and honest about that it is hard in the beginning to allow yourself to belong. And it's really, in my opinion, an allowing. Mm-hmm. You have to allow, or you get to allow yourself to belong.
Yeah.
And it's not easy because that story is still kind of in the background, even if you're working on it.
Right.
And then once you start really allowing yourself to belong, you see the value. And it becomes really easy to allow yourself to belong.
Yeah. And really important. Like, it's almost like a rite of passage. Mm-hmm. And it lays a new foundation to help you go to another level in the work.
100%.
Because there's still more.
Because there's more. There's always more. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to hear, how did doing personal development work impact you in your sales job?
Yeah, so I always had this kind of stigma around sales, which now I see was more a reflection of the self-worth piece.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much sales, it was, I'm not worthy of your time, or I'm not worthy of you responding to my email. And once that switched, I don't even know, I'm sure the words that I started to use were different, but the energy that I brought to the table was different.
Yeah.
And I had a stronger belief in my own value and in the fact that people should want to talk to me. I have something of value, and it's worth their time, their energy, their effort. And I saw a huge transformation in my work. I'd had so much resistance around sales, and it was so tangled up with the self-worth stuff.
Yeah.
That once that released a little bit, things really shifted.
Yeah. Isn't it wild?
Yeah.
Isn't it wild? As you know, I have my doctorate in physical therapy, and when the last 10 years of my career in physical therapy was in medical sales. And I ended up being the director of clinical operations for the company that I was working for. And I was amazed at how many of the medical professionals that who we hired, were so uncomfortable with sales. For the exact reason that you're talking about.
Yeah.
They have a story that says that they don't provide value and that they're not worthy of somebody's time or attention. And when they changed that story, it was like a light turned on and their sales would go through the roof.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So I'm not in a direct selling position anymore, but I support our team of salespeople. And just like me, when I was in that role, everybody wants a quick fix.
Yes.
Like, what are the words I say that are going to get me in the door? What are the, what's the perfect email subject line that everyone is going to open my email and all of a sudden buy my stuff, right? And I see that now for what it is. And I'm trying to kind of shape our sales development more around like a personal development model instead of a sales tips and tricks, and you're going to learn how to close in this workshop and you're going to learn how to prospect in this workshop. It's really all about who you are and what strengths you're bringing to the table and your ability to see those strengths.
Yeah, and own them.
Right.
And embody them. Yeah, so let's talk about this. How is it that you went from direct sales to management?
Well, a position came open and I was really excited about it. I had a ton of all those self-worth things, of course, came back in, and I had lots of sessions with you. And
Yep.
It was ultimately about, putting myself out there and believing that I was worthy of this position. And yeah, I've been in it for about 1.5 years, and I'm loving it, and it's amazing.
So good. That's so good. I love the fact that you addressed self-worth issues through looking at inner child trauma and the stories that you were telling. You ramped up your sales, and then you allowed yourself to apply and find a sense of belonging in a management position.
Yeah, it was scary.
Yeah.
Sometimes that voice still creeps in and it's like, what are you doing in this meeting? Look around. There are really important people at this table. And I have to tell myself, like, I earned a place here.
Yeah. And I'm a really important person at this table. Yeah, I love that. I love that. It is amazing how we can hold ourselves back in so many ways.
Yeah.
Because, well, let me ask you this. Would have the old version of you applied for that position?
Oh, it would be awful. I might have gotten it, but I would have blundered it because I wouldn't have believed in myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It is amazing how that personal development shifts your ability to get a job, be successful in a job or a role, and really have happiness, right? Because it doesn't feel good when you're flailing.
It feels awful.
Exactly. And so to be able to step into a position and bring a level of inner peace is amazing.
Yeah. And now to be able to recognize that when I come alongside, individual members of our sales team and I see them flailing, to be able to help them have compassion for themselves and to not attack themselves for flailing, because it's really easy to go into that, I want to say victim-y, but it's almost like you're a victim of yourself, like you're attacking yourself.
Yeah.
And it's so unproductive.
Yeah, that's self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just drives you down deeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I love that you're bringing, personal development into your sales training, because in, my truth, which doesn't have to be anyone else's, is that they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's hard to develop your sales strategies and techniques if you haven't worked on personal development.
And I remember reading that about 4 years ago. We did a book study in our organization, and we read a book that in the introduction said something to that effect. And the thought in my head was like, I'm screwed. If this is the case, I'm screwed. And come full circle to realize, like, yeah, that is the case, and I can do this.
That's right. That's right.
It's pretty remarkable.
Everybody can do it.
Yeah.
Everybody can look at themselves. Everybody can be with themselves. And everybody can change their reality.
Mm-hmm. But it all starts with that self-worth piece. If you don't believe you're worthy of it, nothing's going to shift.
Yes. Yeah, I watch people that feel like they're very stuck. And almost always, self-worth is where we focus to get them unstuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many of us have that narrative running through our heads that we're not enough, we're not worthy, we're not.
Yeah. I think everybody does until they've done personal development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how has this work changed your relationship with family or friends? I know you said you attracted different people into your reality.
I feel like my relationships are so much deeper. Mm-hmm. They used to be very surface level. Mm-hmm. And when you're willing to be really vulnerable with yourself, you open up this ability to be vulnerable with others on a level that gets you just to a deeper place with them, and to really understand them and empathize with them and see them. And just that shared vulnerability it transforms any relationship. So
yes. Yeah, vulnerability is the key to depth and connection, in my opinion. And if you can't be vulnerable with yourself, how can you be vulnerable with somebody else?
Right.
Yeah.
And so many people want to avoid vulnerability because because you have to go to those dark places.
Yes. You have to be willing to look at yourself and admit that maybe you have some growth in a particular area, or maybe you want to be challenged in a particular area.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing about having more deep relationships is you see that nobody is perfect, right? Like
nobody.
We all have that narrative, like, gotta get to perfect, gotta get to...
Yeah.
And just like you said, with the journey never being done and the learning never being done, like you see it on a different level when you're in deep relationship with a community of people, and you can see like we're all doing the best that we can.
Yeah.
And it's enough.
It is enough. Yeah. And also, the spot that you're in is exactly where you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm.
You may not always like it.
Yeah.
But you're there for a reason. So figure it out if you don't like it.
That's right. Otherwise, it's coming back around.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that vulnerability piece. It is amazing how life-changing being vulnerable is. I was listening to this piece a while ago about leadership, and ended up meditating after I'd listened to the piece, and really got thinking about how excellent leaders are, in my opinion, what they do is they create a safe space that allows the participant that they're working with, right, to be led into a place that they wouldn't go on their own.
Yes.
And the way to create safe space is vulnerability.
That's right.
It's honoring your uniqueness and being vulnerable and showing up, owning those things really intensely. And it is felt. It is absolutely felt, in my opinion. If you are working with somebody in a leadership role and you come with a massive amount of vulnerability, you are creating a safe space where someone is going to trust you to go somewhere together that they otherwise wouldn't be willing to go on their own.
Yeah. My vision of what leadership is has shifted so drastically over the past several years. It used to be very, to be a leader, you have to be you have to have a tough exterior. You have to be able to tell people when they're not doing things correctly. And it's so the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't have a tough exterior. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be open. You have to help them to step into that place where they can do the same thing.
Yeah.
And really look honestly at things together.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And it's interesting too, that kind of tough exterior. Vulnerability includes having difficult conversations about personal growth and development. So if you have an employee or a child or a friend who you are working with in some form of a leadership role, being able to sit with them and have difficult conversations about areas that they need to look at and do some personal development and grow is what allows them to feel safe enough to do it. Right? Because we don't grow, we don't improve typically when we're scared.
Right.
When we don't feel safe, personal development stops.
That's right.
But when somebody is leading you into looking at yourself in a vulnerable, firm, yet compassionate way, it is like night and day to be able to go into that space and look at yourself.
Right. Well, I really believe that all learning has an element of struggle to it, right? Like,
yes.
We don't learn unless we have to struggle with something a little bit. And we're not willing to struggle if we don't feel safe with someone.
No.
Like, that's like, who wants to struggle in front of someone who they think is judging them or,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I will say I've been on the kind of receiving end of that, where I've had mentors or leaders who thought that if they used judgment as a form of manipulation, that I would do what they wanted. And in fact, it just made me shut down and made me incapable of being able to do that work with them. And I've had leaders who maybe are less talented from a functional skill level, but they come with massive vulnerability and the ability to hold space for me in a way that is palpable, and I will follow them as far as they can take me. And there is something about that is really magical, both as a participant as well as the leader, being able to understand that, because we lead and follow every day, all
That's
day, right? We are always the teacher and the student.
Yeah. You learn that real quick when you become a parent.
Right. Parenting 101. You will be the leader and the follower all at the same time.
Yes. And it will switch every second.
That's right. Parenting is like the most humbling thing on this earth, I'm pretty convinced.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's life-changing.
It is. In all the best ways, but intense. Intense.
Just like inner child work.
That's right. It's so funny. I have so many clients who have children, and they'll say to me, I don't want to fuck up my kids. And I just look them in the eyes and say, you are going to.
It's inevitable.
You're going to.
To use your words, sorry, cupcake.
Sorry, cupcake. That's exactly it. But the thing is that everybody who's lived through childhood has trauma. And you could have the most amazing parents ever, and you will still have trauma.
Yeah.
And you will have trauma with them. Because it's about the interpretation of engagements, right?
Right.
And so for me, yeah, you're going to mess up your kid. That's just the long and short of it. But being able to have incredibly open, vulnerable conversation with your child, modeling for them that getting support, seeking support, allowing support, having community, having a sense of belonging, having the ability to look at and work on yourself is how you get through whatever trauma is. You give them those skills and those tools early on in their life, and they are way ahead of the game. I always say that whatever it is, whatever way it is that I mess up my children, because this is going to happen, that I will say, I'm sorry, apologize for it, own it, right? Have open conversation with them. And then if it's bad enough, I'll pay for their therapy.
There you go.
For their healing work, you know?
We should all have a little therapy fund for our children, because
Exactly.
we're going to traumatize them a little, and that's
right.
part of growing up.
That's right. I'm a huge believer. My children, know this, that I'm a huge believer in finding people to support you in whatever your healing looks like, however it is that you want to be supported in your healing, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a practitioner, whether it's a shaman, whatever that is, whether it's a podcast, a book, a walk in nature, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all good.
It is all good. Well, it has been really fun to have you on the podcast talking about inner child trauma, self-help through the lens of self-worth work, and how that impacted your relationships, your job, and the way that you engage with the world.
Yeah, everything.
Everything.
Well,
It's impacted everything.
You've been an amazing partner or mentor. I don't even know what I would call you, but you've really led the way and opened up this community, and it has held me in a way that I'm eternally grateful for.
I have really loved watching you be willing to be held, right? I remember once having a conversation with my Druid mentor when I was going through the program about, if you want to be held, you have to let go. Nobody can hold you if you are holding
really
yourself.
Yeah.
And I watched it over and over again in the community, watching people be able to let go and be held in all of its various different ways, right?
Yeah. Well, we see it as weakness, and it's so not. It's demonstrates so much strength to be able to do that.
It demonstrates so much strength. So much strength. It's funny when younger versions of me would have said that vulnerability was a weakness. And now that couldn't be more opposite for me.
No, it's a superpower.
Exactly. And being held was a weakness. The independence was really a strength. And now I recognize the absolute strength and personal empowerment that comes from being vulnerable and safe and secure enough inside of yourself that you are willing to let somebody hold you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It opens you up for all sorts of magic.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it sure does. Well, it has been really fun to have you on this podcast, as well as in my life. I'm very grateful that we crossed paths, and I can remember that day like it was yesterday. And I'm so happy that we get to continue to have connection, and that I can get to continue to engage with you in all of the beautiful different ways that we engage.
Same.
All right. Well, we have so appreciated having you guys here with us at Rose Quartz Mediumship Podcast, where we have connected with Kim Stills on self-worth and inner child trauma healing.